Kaley Cuoco, the million-dollar smile etched forever into the memory of American television. She is not merely a part of the legendary sitcom The Big Bang Theory. She is the heartbeat that kept that world alive. As Penny, the warm, radiant girl next door, Kaley gave far more than a performance. She turned herself into the place where an entire generation deposited its memories, its joy, and its sense of belonging. For more than a decade, she stood at the center of the spotlight, carrying on her shoulders the very breath of American television, rising from a girl who grew up in Camarillo, California, to become a woman admired by the whole world. Yet that glory was never a shield against the merciless storm that tore through her life. 2 shattered marriages, and a terrifying horse-riding accident that nearly took her legs when she was at the height of her fame. And today, at 40, she faces a relentless storm that keeps tightening around her. So what darkness is still clinging to her, refusing to let her go? If Penny has ever been a beautiful part of your memories, subscribe to the channel and leave a heart for the woman who sacrificed so much of her private life to keep that light from ever fading. Not every wound bleeds. Some simply learn how to smile. Long before the world learned her name, innocence was already slipping quietly through her fingers. Kaley Christine Cuoco was born on November 30th, 1985, in Camarillo, California, into a calm, middle-class household shaped by steady love and quiet expectation. Her father, Gary Carmine Cuoco, an Italian-American working in real estate, and her mother, Lane Ann, née Wingate, of English and German heritage, kept their home orderly, warm, and disciplined. And young Kaley grew up with a single, constant fear: disappointing the people who believed in her. Even at only 3 years old, a tennis racket had already been placed in her hands. Her earliest steps into childhood framed not by play, but by practice. There were no dramas, no chaos, no struggle to survive. Only a quiet home that trained a child to be perfect too soon. When Brianna arrived 3 years later, joy filled the rooms, yet an invisible current began to pull Kaley away. At 6, she stood beneath the hum of studio lights on a Barbie commercial set, feeling childhood quietly loosen its grip. Her father steered her from audition to audition, her mother smoothing her hair and waiting patiently as their little girl grew brighter in the world, and further from it at the same time. By the time most children were learning who they wanted to be, Kaley was already learning how to perform it. Acting was never her only devotion. Tennis claimed her mornings, the court becoming another arena where discipline replaced play. Ranked among Southern California's top young amateurs before 16, she lived a double life measured in call times and practice schedules. Sweat on the court at dawn, scripts under studio lights by afternoon, lines memorized late into the night. The set raised me, she would later recall, pride braided tightly with longing, calling it her second home. A home built of cameras and cues where bedtime stories gave way to applause. By 10, in late 1995, she was sharing screens with Hollywood veterans, appearing in films like Virtuosity and Picture Perfect, each credit adding polish to her resume while quietly sanding away pieces of childhood. Appearances on Ellen, then a starring role in Growing Up Brady, taught her an early unspoken rule: smile on cue, cry on command, and never falter. Adults praised her professionalism. She absorbed it as duty. My only defiance, she once admitted with a faint, eye-knowing smile, was simply refusing to stop. There were mornings when she sat half-lost to sleep in the passenger seat, racket pressed against her side and script resting in her lap, as her father drove through a fog that felt thicker than the world itself. The mingled smell of sweat and makeup clinging to her like a permanent memory. While other girls ran toward the fading light of sunset, she ran toward another audition, lying awake long after the cameras stopped rolling, rehearsing lines instead of fantasies. A child forced to perform living before she was ever permitted to experience it. At 16, the moment did not feel like a choice, but like a door slamming shut behind her in silence. Kaley did not abandon her tennis racket. She simply let it slip out of her life, and as if the court had already released her before she could say goodbye. Stepping into acting, she was swept away like by a cold current, carrying both the glare of fame and an exile from her own childhood. Years later, she would say that things just happened. Yet beneath that calm lived a truth she never confessed. Every step forward left something lifeless behind. The applause grew thicker, the lights harsher, the rooms more crowded, but inside remained only the fading outline of a girl who had never been allowed to be fragile. Dawn practices, missed birthdays, and silent rides home after flawless performances did not train her. They carved her into someone unbreakable, yet painfully alone. Her childhood did not shatter in tragedy. It quietly dissolved beneath the lights that made her name. And long before real storms gathered on her horizon, Kaley Cuoco had already learned how to keep moving, carrying the weight with a smile and enduring it in silence. Some childhoods do not shatter. They simply bend, until even light begins to leave small, hidden scars. It polishes them too early, grinding them down until even light begins to feel like a blade against the skin. The applause that once trailed every childhood step of Kaley Cuoco never truly vanished. It simply retreated, growing colder, hovering just beyond the edge of the spotlight like a merciless reminder that yesterday's glow guarantees nothing about tomorrow. Hollywood unfolded before her like a glass and steel coliseum where every dream carries a price, and the only weapon you are allowed to hold is a persistence that slowly bleeds you dry. The lights that once waited for her turned away, forcing her to chase them, each step heavier than the last. By 18, her face was familiar to the lens, but yet her name drifted nameless through the crowd. Casting rooms greeted her with courteous, empty warmth, a nod of recognition that stopped just short of memory, as if her presence hovered on the edge of recall but never quite landed. She was familiar enough to be noticed, yet not distinctive enough to be named, a face suspended between visibility and erasure. Recognition brushed her early, only to loosen its grip, drifting away without ceremony. In a machine that rewarded constant motion, Kaley felt stranded in the eye of the storm, perfectly visible, yet strangely unclaimed. The assurance that had once carried her began to feel like a tightening shell, pressing harder with each closed door. She kept returning. For sitcoms, pilots, commercials, any opportunity that allowed the dream to keep drawing breath. Now waiting rooms glowed under unforgiving fluorescent light, crowded with hopeful strangers, wrapped in a hush so dense it amplified the thud of her own heartbeat. Every polite, distant, "we'll let you know," landed like a latch sliding into place. Looking back, she reflected, "This town doesn't wound you with cruelty. It slowly blurs you out of focus." And in that blur, she learned that the sharpest hurt was not rejection, but disappearance. For years, her career existed in a fragile in-between, trembling between brief flashes of recognition and endless, smothering quiet. She lent her voice to animated figures, slipped in and out of guest roles that flickered for a moment and vanished, and kept smiling at cameras that saw her perfectly, but never quite held onto her. Looking back, she would admit, "I was always working, yet there were days I felt like a shadow, pretending to be real." It was the quiet torment of an artist suspended between being seen and being erased, visible in frame, invisible in memory. Then, In 2005, at 19, a narrow beam of air broke through the suffocating water. The role of Billy Jenkins on Charmed. It was not a crown, but it was breath after years of drowning quietly. After so long living in the margin of recognition, she walked onto that set with the composure of someone hardened by the dark. And suddenly, she burned bright. For the first time in years, the lights did not wound her. They finally felt like shelter. Not every ending brings silence. Some simply dims the light and waits. When Charmed closed its final chapter, Hollywood did not reject Kaley loudly. It simply softened its gaze and looked past her. In 2006, she auditioned for a new sitcom as Katie, gave everything she had, and still heard a polite no that lingered like a bruise. Yet she refused to fade, moving from room to room, script to script, carrying hope like a fragile glass that never shattered. Months passed like quiet, exhausting tides before that phone finally rang again. The character had been reborn as Penny, and this time, they wanted her back. Kaley did not return as a hopeful girl asking to be chosen. She returned as a woman who knew exactly who she was. When the camera began to roll, something clicked with devastating precision. Timing, presence, chemistry, destiny. It didn't feel like I found it, she later reflected. It felt like it finally stopped running from me. That moment became the Big Bang Theory, and with it, the world could no longer afford to forget her. Her rise was not a story of glitter or good fortune, but of endurance, discipline, and a quiet bravery few ever see. She was not escaping hardship. She was wrestling with invisibility itself. In a city built on forgetting, Kaley forced remembrance, not by shouting, but by burning so steadily that no one could look away. Fame did not lift Kaley Cuoco up. It closed around her, quietly, relentlessly, without mercy. When the Big Bang Theory appeared in 2007, it looked small, almost fragile, like one more experiment destined to disappear. A half-lit set where real equations were being quietly checked by real scientists behind the scenes. No one predicted a cultural force. Least of all did anyone imagine how completely it would swallow the woman standing at its center. The first version had already failed. The character called Katie collapsed under its own weight, and Kaley was dismissed without ceremony. Too young, not right, easily replaceable. When the role was rewritten into Penny, something softer yet more dangerous emerged. Warmth, emotional intelligence, a presence designed to hold the room together, the ordinary world walking into a room of genius. That when Kaley was summoned back, it did not feel like destiny. It felt like survival. A few lines, a live audience, a laugh she measured carefully. And then, without warning, the character began to breathe. Penny became the anchor, the human pulse amid brilliance. And Kaley did not simply perform her. She absorbed her, surrendered rhythm, breath, and instinct until the line between role and self thinned beyond recognition. What followed was not an explosion, but a tightening. Season after season, the show grew heavier, larger, unavoidable. A weekly ritual watched by more than 20 million people. A clock that moved in unison across living rooms every Thursday night, while the science on screen was grounded in truth and the humor sharpened into cultural language, slowly becoming part of a franchise that would one day generate billions. Kaley's face multiplied across billboards, magazines, red carpets that blurred into obligation, as the Big Bang Theory quietly amassed over $3.5 billion in advertising alone and later struck syndication deals worth more than $1 billion. The laughter looked effortless. The cost was not. 12-hour days hardened into routine. Perfection was no longer requested. It was assumed. People heard the jokes, she once said quietly, but they didn't hear how tired I was becoming. By 2014, her paycheck reached $1 million per episode, a figure the world dissected instead of celebrating, as if money could measure a soul. Was she worth it? Could she hold it? Would she crack? There were nights she laughed through tapings, then closed the door of her trailer and sat in silence, staring at nothing. From trying to remember when the laughter had last felt like her own. Admiration poured in. Rest never followed. Eventually, the body spoke in a language no applause could drown out. In 2010, in the moment when the machine of celebrity had tightened its grip beyond escape, a brutal riding accident tore through her leg, locking cold metal beneath her skin where freedom once moved, as if the price of light had to be paid in steel. Pain stayed, uninvited and permanent. Recovery hovered like a distant rumor. Still, she came back. Slower steps, calibrated smiles, swallowing every jolt of agony, refusing to disrupt the force that now owned her, while an entire industry pretended endurance came free of charge. That strength was real, a co-star would later say, just because it had nowhere else to go. But strength forced into repetition is not power. It is erosion. A silent dread began to bloom. That Penny was loved more than the woman carrying her. That America remembered the waitress from Nebraska more vividly than the actress who bled to keep her alive. By the time the series closed in 2019, after 12 seasons and 279 episodes, the thunder of applause crashed once more, and then dissolved into a merciless quiet, leaving 34-year-old Kaley alone in her dressing room, stripped of the armor of laughter that had guarded her for 12 years. Instead of bathing in the spotlight, she turned away from it, quietly remaking herself as an independent producer and founding Norman Productions, named after her beloved dog, a tender emblem of loyalty and endurance. With The Flight Attendant in 2020, she shed her former skin and became Cassie, a self-destructive flight attendant haunted by her own choices, earning Emmy and Golden Globe nominations not as trophies, but as proof she could inhabit the darkest emotional terrain. In 2023, she went even deeper with Based on a True Story, co-producing and embodying Ava, a multi-layered, morally fractured woman in a razor-edged dark comedy. From the girl who abandoned tennis at 16 to the woman rewriting her fate, Kaley built no career on spectacle, only on reinvention, carrying scars that would never fully heal and transforming them into art that refused to be forgotten. After years of being burned by brightness, quiet did not feel like relief. It felt like a fragile truce. Kaley Cuoco did not hunt for spectacle when Ryan Sweeting slipped into her life. She reached instead for something that felt solid after so much trembling. A professional tennis player with a softened stillness in his gaze, he arrived in the summer of 2013 like a slow breath after a long scream, and within weeks, she felt a loosening inside her chest she barely recognized. Sometimes, you just know, she would later admit, but the words carried a tremor, as if certainty itself could wound. And for the first time, I believed I could rest. 6 months later, on New Year's Eve, they married beneath thin threads of white light that flickered like distant promises as midnight bled into the sky. Barefoot in a blush dress, she laughed as the year turned, clinging to the illusion, just for that night, that the chase that had shaped her entire life had finally released her. In those early months, their Tarzana house felt suspended between dream and reality, filled with muted music and mornings that arrived softly instead of extracting a price. They drifted barefoot across the kitchen floor, swaying to half-forgotten songs, his guitar trembling in a low, fragile hush, while she sang beside him in a voice she had long kept hidden from the world. For once, Joy did not feel like a temporary gift or a borrowed illusion. It felt carved directly from her own scars, luminous, intoxicating, and painfully delicate beneath the surface. What the cameras preserved in light concealed a quiet splintering underneath. In the summer of 2014, then the momentum of Ryan's career simply ran out of breath, injuries pulling him off the court and into a silence that followed him home. He loved her sincerely, yet standing beside her relentless rise only sharpened what he felt, slipping away. The more she tried to lift him, the smaller he seemed to become. He wasn't unkind, a close confidant later reflected. He was drowning quietly inside himself. Kaley did what she had always been trained to do. She carried more than she should have. "I believed love could fix everything," she admitted later. "I believed I could be enough." Only afterward did she see how instinctive it was to cling, shaped by a lifetime of never being allowed to let anything fall. Slowly, love hardened into effort. Laughter thinned, conversations shortened, meals drifted into separate rooms. As doors closed without anger, their silence louder than any fight. To the world, she remained flawless. In private, she felt herself fading. "Every day," she said once, "felt like keeping someone afloat, until I realized I was the one sinking." There were no children to anchor them, only plans that never took root. The house that once breathed warmth grew still, and at night she moved down the hallway, fingertips grazing the walls as if memory might answer back. Eventually, stamina cracked beneath reality. Ryan withdrew deeper into himself, trapped between the man he had once imagined and the man he feared he was becoming. She stood powerless, watching the person she loved slip into a distance she could no longer bridge. By the summer of 2015, at 29, nearly 3 years into their marriage, there was no longer any storm, only a quiet and bone-deep exhaustion living inside both of them. In September, she filed for divorce. The prenup kept everything tidy. She kept the house and the dogs, while he left with his car and the invisible weight he could not escape. It was never about money, she later reflected. It was about finding the courage to let go. On one of their final nights, she found him sitting alone in the dark, staring at their wedding photographs. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The silence carried everything. Later, she covered the tattoo of their wedding date with a moth, not to erase the past, but to mark the transformation it had carved into her. "I don't hide it," she said softly. "It reminds me that I survived." The morning after the papers were signed, she returned to a tennis court she hadn't stepped on since childhood. Not to compete, but simply to breathe again. "It was just me," she recalled, bruised, honest, free. She never spoke bitterly of Ryan. She only learned quietly that some love stories do not end because they were untrue, but because two hearts reached their limit at the same time. She did not simply walk out of one broken marriage and into another. She stepped from a fracture that had been beautifully varnished into a dream so radiant it seemed immune to darkness, and convinced herself that this was what growth looked like. After Ryan, Kaley Cuoco never said her heart had shattered. She said it had been recalibrated, as if sorrow were something that could be neatly mapped, measured, and tucked back into place. For 3 years, she practiced sleeping without listening for footsteps, speaking the word forever, like a language that no longer belonged to her. At 33, she believed she finally understood love. Not as fire, but as oxygen. Not as rescue, but as presence. Yet no wisdom can armor a heart still brave enough to hope. In 2017, beneath a California sky so vast it felt incapable of harm, and she met Carl Cook at a charity horse event. He did not move to Hollywood's rhythm. He moved to the Earth's dawn, dust, discipline, and the steady drum of hooves. If Ryan had been a storm, Carl was the hush after rain, quiet yet profoundly deep. He didn't see a star, she would later remember. He saw a woman trying to breathe. They spent weekends riding across endless fields, where sunlight spilled like gold across their shoulders and their laughter dissolved into wind. No cameras, no crowds, no performance. Only two people believing simplicity could save them. Carl would later say, "Back then, I was certain we couldn't lose each other. We felt too alike." By her birthday that November, he knelt beneath warm barn lights to propose, horses shifting softly behind them, her tears already arriving before his words. In June 2018, they married at his family's San Diego ranch, a wide sky, grass bending like whispered vows, her lace gown catching morning light like a promise that would not last. When they exchanged rings, even the wind seemed to pause. Their Hidden Hills home stretched across 12 acres of sunlight, dogs, and freshly cut grass, a private heaven built from space, freedom, and hope. Every sunrise there felt like proof life could begin again, she once said. But heaven lived on two different clocks, and slowly it became an empty corridor. Her career demanded 12 to 14-hour filming days under blinding studio lights. Carl's life remained anchored to dawn, the ranch, and the patient breathing of his horses. They loved each other, yet from opposite banks of a river that kept widening. To Access Hollywood, she said, "We love each other, but we live our own lives," a sentence that sounded modern, mature, and colder than she intended. At first, they called the distance healthy space. Then the texts grew shorter, calls came later, and dinners cooled beneath a pale chandelier. "We didn't lose each other in a fight," she recalled. "We lost each other in all the moments we didn't meet." Carl would later admit, "I believed love could survive different schedules. I was wrong." Their marriage did not shatter. It thinned, like a thread stretched past its limit until only air remained. There were no children to pull them back together, no small voices to echo through their vast home. On sleepless nights, she walked the hallway, fingertips grazing the walls, as if memory itself might answer. "Sometimes I felt like I was living beside him, not with him," she would confess quietly. And Carl, remembering those final months, said, "I kept thinking we were being practical until I realized practicality had replaced us." In 2021, at 35, the ending arrived gently, and therefore cruelly. Their joint statement was polished, blame-free, and painful in its neatness. They loved and respected each other, yet their paths had diverged. The prenup settled everything with cold efficiency. She kept the Hidden Hills home, now more archive than sanctuary. He kept his horses and the land that defined his life. No public fallout, no lingering disputes, only paperwork where a shared future had once been imagined. Returning to the flight attendant, she carried every fracture into her performance. "I didn't act that role," she said. "I recognized her." Alone one night on the kitchen floor with her dogs, she scrolled through their wedding photos. The woman smiling back looked like someone else. "I still believe in love," she whispered. "I just don't believe in forever anymore." Carl would later reflect, "We didn't fail each other. We ran out of room to breathe together." She spoke of him without bitterness, only clarity. Two real hearts, mismatched rhythms. Some love stories do not end because they were false. They end because even true love can suffocate when lives drift too far apart. And beyond that silence, life was already opening another door, imperfect, unexpected, and still very much alive. Twice entering marriage, Kaley Cuoco believed love could become a home. She stepped into it the way one enters a cathedral, full of faith, unguarded, willing to give everything just to be allowed to stay. Yet each time the doors closed, she was the one left behind. No accusations, not even a goodbye. What was meant to be a place of return slowly turned into a quiet wave, washing away the peace she had waited so long to reach. There were nights, long after the stage lights had gone dark, when Kaley sat alone in an empty room, facing what no role could protect her from. Applause once filled theaters, but it could not fill the silence she returned to at home. After too many endings, she came to understand that no amount of fame is enough to keep a heart from growing tired. In April 2022, she spoke a sentence barely above a whisper, as if releasing herself. "I will never get married again." Not out of bitterness, but because she was simply too exhausted to keep hoping. The world calls her strong, but few see the woman beneath that steadiness. One who had carried so much for so long she no longer knew how to put anything down. And then, at the exact moment she stopped searching, Tom Pelphrey entered her life. Not loudly, not urgently, but like a quiet afternoon drifting in. This love did not demand that she shine or sacrifice herself. It simply existed, slow enough, gentle enough, safe enough for a weary heart to finally rest. For the first time in years, Kaley no longer felt watched or measured. She felt seen. "People call it love at first sight," she said. But it wasn't loud. It was like sunlight after a long season of rain. Tom came without games, without retreating when things grew real, and where others leaned on her endurance, he left room for her silence to breathe. Their days passed softly, aimless walks, dinners without an audience, conversations stretching into dawn. She called him her calm. He called her his miracle. Then, in October, life turned again without warning. Kaley was pregnant, fear and wonder arriving together. After everything she had lived through, she found herself standing before a future she had once been afraid to imagine. "I never thought I would be a mother," she admitted. "Maybe it was just waiting until I learned how to stay." In March 2023, when her daughter, Matilda Carmine Ritchie Pelphrey, was born, the world fell quiet. "I didn't cry from pain," Kaley said, "but I cried because for the first time, everything was exactly where it belonged." Joy didn't soften anything. It stripped the illusion away. Motherhood arrived with a quiet gravity, nights splintered by fear, responsibility tightening with every breath, the ache of leaving for work while her body begged to stay still. "It's the most beautiful exhaustion," she said, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her, hair matted, eyes hollow, smiling anyway. Between filming and feedings, scripts and diapers, she sometimes drifted asleep on the couch, her daughter's tiny sock clenched in her palm like proof she was still standing. "Some days I felt like I was failing everywhere," she admitted. And then she'd look at me, and I knew I wasn't. Through it all, Tom didn't step in to fix or explain. He stayed. At 3 a.m, and when the house was reduced to soft whimpers and the dull click of bottle caps, he washed bottles in silence so she could steal 10 minutes of sleep. No words, no recognition, just hands that never left. "He never tried to save me," she said. "He just stayed." There were no vows, no deadlines, no evidence demanded. Presence held. Now her life moves to a different rhythm. Mornings shaped by laughter from a crib instead of call sheets, rooms carrying the scent of coffee and baby lotion, joy quieter, but anchored in truth. "I used to chase happiness," she reflected. "Now it meets me when I stop running." This chapter isn't a return or a prize. It's something far rarer, a beginning that doesn't require her to disappear in order to be kept. Only after coming to understand what love truly meant, through motherhood, through a life that no longer demanded she bleed to prove her worth, did Kaley Cuoco fully realize how mercilessly her body had once been tested. Long before the quiet mornings beside Tom, before feeling the weight of her daughter sleeping against her chest, happiness delivered its first lesson, unyielding and unforgiving, not by taking love away, but by asking how much a body could endure before it finally gave way. In September 2010, at 24, the world watched Kaley Cuoco at the peak of her rise. The Big Bang Theory was roaring, laughter bouncing off studio walls, her face everywhere, from billboards to living rooms, across America. She looked unbreakable. Away from the cameras, her refuge was simpler: open fields, steady hooves, wind cutting clean through thought. May horses were where she breathed again, where fame loosened its grip. That California afternoon felt harmless. Golden light, a tightened saddle, one long inhale of peace. Then the world snapped, a sudden spook, a violent blur. Gravity turned savage. She hit the ground with a force that stole sound itself. When she looked down, reality rejected her. Her leg twisted beyond recognition, bone tearing through flesh. "My first thought was disbelief," she said later. "I kept thinking, this can't be my body. This can't be me." Pain arrived cold and complete. Shouting, hands, sirens. She lay staring at the sky, dirt and blood thick in her breath, red light smearing across her vision as Los Angeles rushed toward her. Inside the emergency room, time disintegrated. Both bones, the tibia and fibula, were shattered beyond anything that felt certain. The doctors spoke in fragments, warning of damage that might never fully recover, of a leg balanced on a fragile line. In the shock, one possibility surfaced, quiet but devastating. She could lose it. "They put papers in front of me," she remembered. "My hand wouldn't stop shaking. An hour earlier, I was laughing." Surgery bled into surgery. Metal entered her body. Plates, screws, pain settling in without permission. After the second operation, she lay motionless, not just hurting, but terrified by a thought she barely dared to face: that she might never act again. For someone who lived through movement, the stillness felt like an ending. Production halted. Penny, the heartbeat of the Big Bang Theory, vanished from screens. But Kaley refused to vanish with her. "I wasn't finished," she told herself. "Not like this." Weeks later, then she returned to set with no triumph left, only endurance. Every step burned. Every scene was held together by breath and will. On camera, Penny stayed bright and effortless. Off camera, Kaley learned to trust a leg that had nearly failed her, a body stitched with steel and fear. When she finally stood under the studio lights again, not healed but upright, the audience rose before a single word was spoken. It wasn't laughter. It was recognition. The scar down her shin caught the light. "It's proof," she said softly, "of how close I came to losing everything, and how hard I fought to stay." The pain never left. It stayed beneath her skin, no longer something to outrun, but something to live with. "I stopped being afraid of pain," she reflected. "I started listening to it." Years later, her body spoke again, this time through her hands. As after the birth of her daughter Matilda in 2023, pain settled into her wrists with a quiet persistence that refused to leave. These were the hands that had once held reins and scripts, and now shook slightly under the weight of something infinitely smaller. Doctors called it tendinitis, a common strain of motherhood. Kaley felt the cruelty of it more personally. There were moments I hesitated before picking her up, she admitted. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid my hands would fail me. Both wrists were wrapped in braces, turning the simplest acts, lifting, rocking, holding, into careful negotiations. There were no cameras then, no audience, only the soft click of bottle caps in the dark, the ache pulsing through her arms, and the steady sound of her baby breathing nearby. Pain didn't arrive with drama, but it arrived with repetition. Every feeding, every night wake, every time she reached out and felt weakness answer back. She learned to move slower, to cradle rather than grip, to ask for help without shame. The scars on her leg told one story. The braces on her wrist told another, one about endurance without spectacle. "My body keeps asking me to listen," she said quietly. And this time, I did. Tom watched her struggle through those nights, wordless, steady, taking the baby from her arms when her hands gave out, returning her only when she was ready. "You don't have to be strong here," he told her once. "Just stay." And she did. When she rides now, wind threading through her hair, her daughter's laughter nearby, what she feels isn't victory. It's steadiness. Hands that once trembled now hold without fear, not because the pain disappeared, but because she learned how to live alongside it. Today, at the age of 40, Kaley Cuoco occupies a life that looks composed to the world, yet is quietly reinforced by intention and discipline beneath every layer. Her net worth is estimated at $110 million, but it operates less like a glittering symbol of fame and more like a carefully engineered foundation. Nearly half embedded in blue-chip California real estate, a steady and powerful current still flowing from the Big Bang Theory residuals that continue to generate an estimated $8 to $10 million annually, with the remainder strategically divided among production earnings, selective brand partnerships, and deliberately held long-term investments. At the height of the Big Bang Theory, she reached the rare echelon of performers, commanding close to $1 million per episode. Yet the true inflection point came when she stepped behind the camera. Transforming Norman Productions into a vehicle of ownership, influence, and creative autonomy, a form of power far rarer and more enduring than money alone in Hollywood. Her real wealth, however, is most visible in where and how she lives. Cuoco has anchored her life in Thousand Oaks, California, centering it around a 40-acre equestrian ranch purchased in 2017 for about $4.99 million. This is not a showpiece estate. It is a working property with stables, paddocks, and space dedicated to rescued animals. Horses, dogs, and other rescues structure her days, not the other way around. In 2023, she added a modern ranch-style residence in Thousand Oaks for roughly $6.4 million, a clean-lined, low-profile home designed for privacy and routine rather than spectacle. High ceilings, wide glass openings, and functional indoor-outdoor flow define a space meant to breathe, not impress. Past transactions, such as the sale of a custom Hidden Hills home after her second marriage and a brief ownership in Agora Hills, trace a clear arc. She has steadily moved away from celebrity density and toward land, silence, and control. Even her vehicles follow that logic, practical SUVs chosen for ranch life and family logistics, not a collection curated for attention. Daily life now moves with a deliberate softness that contrasts sharply with her early years of relentless hustle. She oscillates between sets, stables, and home, carving out mornings for riding, afternoons for work, and evenings reserved almost sacredly for Matilda. She's engaged to actor Tom Pelfrey, and together they are raising Matilda Carmine Ritchie Pelfrey, born March 2023, in an environment that feels grounded rather than gilded. Their family moments, quiet breakfasts, playful holidays, and unpolished laughter suggest a mother who measures success in presence rather than applause. Kaley has spoken about protecting ordinary rituals like bedtime stories and school drop-offs, small acts that once felt impossible during her meteoric rise. Physically and emotionally, she presents as steadier, calmer, and more self-possessed than in her earlier career. After her serious horseback riding accident in 2010, she rebuilt her body with a balanced regimen that favors strength training, Pilates, and regular movement rather than extreme workouts, coupled with a nutrition approach centered on whole foods, lean protein, and mindful moderation. Her recent appearances, notably the 31st Critics' Choice Awards on January 4, 2026, showcased darker hair, refined styling, and an ease that reads like earned confidence, not performance. She prioritizes sleep, frequent time in nature, and moments with animals as part of her mental health routine, a deliberate retreat from Hollywood's constant glare. In terms of philanthropy, she has quietly woven generosity into the fabric of her life, is consistently supporting animal welfare and children's causes with contributions that over the years have often reached the mid to high six-figure range, while also giving in ways that rarely seek the spotlight. Professionally, she remains restlessly engaged rather than comfortably settled, leading and producing Vanished 2026 for MGM+, continuing to breathe dark, mischievous life into Harley Quinn and shaping a new generation of complex female-driven stories through Yes, Norman Productions, as if determined to leave behind not just a career, but a creative legacy. In the end, Kaley Cuoco's present is not a celebration of excess, but a study in balance. Her wealth, her homes, and her career sparkle, yet the truer story lies in the invisible trade-offs that shaped her, the years of discipline that now allow her tenderness, or the applause that once replaced childhood and the motherhood that gently rewrites her priorities. She stands as proof that a life admired by millions can still carry private weights, and that grace often grows from what we survive rather than what we display. If her journey makes you reflect on success, sacrifice, or the meaning of fulfillment, share your thoughts below and join the conversation. And if you believe that every public life conceals a quieter, more fragile truth beneath its shine, subscribe to follow more stories like hers. Because behind every legend, beneath every spotlight, there is a human heartbeat that deserves to be felt, not forgotten.